Good afternoon. I'm Josh Rubin, the founder and editor-in-chief of Cool Hunting. We're a publication, consultancy, and experimental retail platform, thanks, that caters to curious and creative people. While we find and share stories about products and services and places and ideas, it's people who inspire us the most. And I'm honored to be joined by these two brilliant gentlemen who I'm fortunate enough to have known for a little while, and I'm proud to say they're among Cool Hunting's readers. They both moved here to Paris from California within the last couple years, and despite orbiting the same small planet called Silicon Valley, they only met recently in line to drop their kids off at school. Tony Fadell is the inventor of the iPod, one of the inventors of the iPhone, which is going to be celebrating its 10th anniversary very shortly, and founder of Nest, the company that pioneered the Internet of Things. Ian, who we've heard from a couple times over the last days of Viva, his long career in music ranged from being president of the Beastie Boys label Grand Royale to CEO of Beats Music, and as I think we all know, he is now the chief digital officer at LVMH. So we're here to talk about design and technology, which is an intersection that maybe 10, 15 years ago was really rarely seen, and now it's almost ubiquitous. It's a pretty broad subject, so we're going to narrow in a little bit and talk about creating a design culture within a large organization. We're also going to talk about industry disruption, which these guys are both quite well versed in. But first, I just want to hear a little more about, share a little bit more about Tony and Ian. So, Tony, whether in-house at Apple or with your own startup Nest, you're clearly an entrepreneur. You don't think about product in a bubble. You think about how it lives in a landscape and how it moves along a roadmap. But you also think like a designer, understanding the user and iterating through refinements necessary to make a product useful, usable, and desirable. If you can separate the two, which came first, design or entrepreneurship?
Well, for me specifically, it was definitely entrepreneurship. It was all about just gaining independence. For me, in second grade, I had my own business, and with my brother, and we were selling eggs. And when you selling eggs door to door, and so when you start getting money in your hand, and your parents can't tell you what to do when you earned your own money, it was a big form of independence. So all the time after getting that, bitten by that bug, I just kept going and going and trying to figure out other ways to earn money to then ultimately be independent. So, and then the design came afterwards, because you quickly learned you needed to figure out to make differentiated products to actually get people to give you, money, right? They needed to figure out, it wasn't just two kids, oh, cute kids, and let's give you some money. It was like, when you get older, it's like, okay, now let's go figure it out, right? How to do it right.
Nice. And Ian, you write code still. I think you still maybe a little bit here and there.
I wish I wish I had time to write more code. And whenever I write code, it's because I'm teaching my daughter how to write code.
Nice. So you still kind of sort of write code.
I can.
And you can write code. And you make
music. I'm going to be okay. And if I lose my job, I'll get another
You're going to be okay. Awesome.
We're both learning a new coding language right now. It's called French.
That's true.
And we're not kidding.
Nice.
C'est vrai.
C'est vrai.
So when you started webmastering for the Beasties in '93, it wasn't necessarily because you were looking for a job, as I understand, but because you love their music, you love music, but you also saw the digital future. And from creating, from there to creating, Winamp and co-founding and running Beats, you've always blended this love of music with technology. Does one drive the other? Would you say you're more artist or nerd?
I'm definitely a nerd. Probably more nerd than artist. I think Tony told the story about growing up, and I think we are where we come from in so many ways. I came from, I started programming computers when I was 10 because I had access to one. My stepdad had a computer in the house, so I started then. But he and my mom divorced when I was 14, so I really stopped then and was just skateboarding and listening to music and playing in a punk rock band. So I think that that was a part of my growing up, those two sides of that coin, and that's what carried on. But I studied computer science because I thought that I would have a better chance of getting a job if I studied computer science. At the time, it was the early 90s, pre-web. I figured I'd be programming ATM machines by day and then, doing music by night. I never dreamed that you could put the two together. So the fact that, eventually you found out that I could put the two together was a really pleasant revelation for me.
Nice. So my next set of questions are really for both of you, and I'm going to direct the first one at you, Ian, but I'm going to ask you the same thing, Tony, so be ready.
Sure. All right.
I'd argue that two industry disruptions you've both played key roles in are music and telecommunications. They both couldn't have been achieved without having a strong design culture, a strong understanding of the role of design and technology and how design fits and delivers a user experience. Would you agree? I mean, can you speak to that? Speak to design culture within a large organization being a key factor for determining the success of a product?
Well, I think that what it comes down to is really you just have to build something that people use. I think that one of the things that I've struggled with at LVMH is the notion that this revolution that's happening is somehow technical. I think it's actually cultural, and it has to do with the fact that the internet is reconnecting people. So on that level, it has to be human based, and that's why design is so important. I think what I'm always trying to encourage people to do at LVMH is not start with the technology. You don't ask the question, should we do e-commerce? What you do is you say, what is the experience we want the customer to have? Now, if that is meant to include e-commerce, then you'll arrive there naturally. But it might be something else that really solves the problem. So if you're solving the customer problem, I think often design or other parts of technology really have to factor into that. I think when you're doing it technology up is always when you fail.
So same question. Design culture. So within any organization to achieve the kind of success that we've seen with some of the biggest products in the world,
Right.
How does that design culture play a role in the process?
Well, there's one. It has to start with a affinity for it at the very top. In other words, an appreciation that we are going to do things maybe slightly slower, a little bit more deliberate, understanding our customer, understanding what the technology can make with the customer, and know it's going to take a little longer. And if the design isn't right, you're going to actually hold it up till you get it right, as opposed to, it works well enough. Or we're going to test it with data, and then if it seems good enough, then you need someone who has an affinity for it. Not that they're great at design, but can understand what it is and the benefits of it. And then if they're not a great opinion-based decision maker around design, they know to turn it over to someone and let them run with it, and then pass the baton. The problem that I always see in a lot of cultures is that the CEO thinks they're really great at design, and then they sit there and go, oh, this is the way it's going to be, and then you're like, no, you didn't get it, right? So it's really understanding the CEO understanding what they're really good at, and then if they're great at design, that's great. But if they don't, they turn over that to the right people to help.
I have a question, being a digital music person, that I've always wanted to ask you. How much earlier could the iPod have come out? My recollection of that time is that there were a lot of really mediocre MP3 players on the scene. So to that point, you guys refined the design of the iPod. How you're talking about it might take a little longer. So how much did the design add?
So what was really interesting, so this was a crazy moment in time in basically January, February 2001. So there was all these MP3 players out there.
Creative,
Rio, what have you. And then there was iTunes, and there was, Music Match, and there was the one thing from Reel, whatever it was.
Real Jukebox.
Real Jukebox. So there was those jukebox apps. What happened in January and February 2001 was that a new hard drive came out right that basically that month, a new battery technology came out, and just a few months later, a new processor came out.
All completely unrelated to
All completely
the iPod.
unrelated, and it was just the stars aligned. It was like that. But you had to know that you could put those pieces together, and it came together and went.
But so Ian, you just made is my mic still on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You just made the point that you need to lead with design first and then figure out how the technology fits. And you're saying that you had the processor and the drive that came out that enabled this. Was the vision already there and you were waiting for the technology to catch up?
Well, what you saw was you already knew that the products themselves that were out there weren't good enough. You already could feel them and you go, they're not right. What's wrong with them? The user interface isn't right. It takes too long to put things on the storage medium. They didn't hold enough. They're too clunky to use. They were like, numbers like on the CD player,
Totally.
Portable CD player, instead of actually logical.
It might be hard for people to remember, but I had an MP3 player that held 7 songs.
7 songs.
I had a Casio MP3 watch that held about maybe 7 songs.
And it took you like a half an hour to load the songs on. You're like, wait a second, I got a CD, and it's like, I can put that on really, really quickly. So it was really a geeky thing. So you understood the design wasn't right, but then it was, is the technology good enough to do that? And sometimes, if you look back at, in 2000 or 1991, we created the iPhone at General Magic 15 years too soon. We had all the right ideas, but the technology, and we even had the right design, but we didn't have the right technology at the time and networks and everything else to actually create an experience for everyone that we were dreaming of. It wasn't until, so you have to remember there is a huge design element, a huge tech element, and you go between them, and then you figure out if you're going to really meet the expectations you have set.
Okay, so it's really about understanding both goals, needs, opportunities, and figuring out how to navigate what you want for the product and what the technology can enable, and not letting the technology dictate what the product should be, but also making sure that the technology gives the best possible experience to fulfill the design vision for the end user.
Right, and there's one other thing though. There's one which is the social acceptance part of the design. The other thing that happens is you have to make sure people are tracking in their mind, and you're not over here. People's mindsets are here, and you're over here pitching something. You're never going to get them over. They go, that's cool, but you're not going to get them to move over there. You got to get it just ahead so it's differentiated enough, but not so crazy, right? And the only reason why the iPhone could happen, besides the technology piece, was that we already had digital music, we had digital videos, we had internet, we had email, we had mobile phones everywhere. It was because you already were understanding all of those technologies in separate devices, and then it came together, right? That was the other piece of the puzzle that wouldn't have worked when other people were trying to do that just a few years earlier, similar kind of things. The technology wasn't there yet.
So, kind of playing off the social acceptance idea, Ian, historically, you've brought design thinking to technology. Back in the day, where I used to work, we talked about this idea that everything that can be digital will be, and that clearly happened in many categories, especially music. But now you're in the world of luxury goods, where tangible items are core business, not necessarily digital items. In your role at LVMH, you're kind of flipping your script and bringing tech to design in many ways. How can and does technology disrupt this space? And then to the earlier point about user readiness or user acceptance, what is it about this moment that gives you the opportunity to launch things like you've launched just in the past week?
Well, I think that, particularly around e-commerce, if you look historically, e-commerce has been about price and convenience. I would say that's kind of what the first edition of e-commerce was, and those aren't two things that luxury aims to compete on, right? Price and just speed of availability. But I think what's happened is that now that the internet is such a part of all of our lives, it's actually kind of come onto luxury's playing field, because price is about our time, and convenience is more about sort of concierge or service than just simplicity. So I think that actually it's simply become more relevant and the experiences that we're all having in our daily lives, we kind of want, we want everything to be connected to, to our devices, and to be aware of the fact that we're moving from looking at a product online to walking into a store. And so for me, again, it's about just connecting those customer journeys and really looking at it instead of offline versus online, looking at the totality of the journey. When you look at stores like Marks and Spencer and John Lewis in London, the majority of their online purchases are picked up in store, right? That's not offline or online. That's just, this kind of, culmination of technology and lifestyle. And I think that's really where we're at this point. It's not I keep saying the notion of digital is what's not digital at this point. What part of what you do isn't digital? But I think something that's more on the creative side. I think that there is actually a luxury digital medium that hasn't been defined yet. The example I always use is the Lumiere brothers invented moving pictures. They didn't invent narrative film. That was 30 years later that kind of the medium of film was developed. And I think that's kind of a natural transition from technology to emotion as well. And I think that's where we are with shopping, to be, as an example. I don't think the future of luxury shopping is a bunch of dresses in a grid and which one do you want, and then you check out with PayPal and this kind of commodity experience. I think that that the luxury experience comes up it goes up from there, and we're in that zone where the technology has been developed, but the medium of the experience we haven't seen it yet.
But you also have another great product under your belt, which is the Heuer Smartwatch, right? Which is another blend of technology and luxury, right? Which I think has been pretty great success, right?
Yeah, it's been very successful. Thank you. And we're on the second version of that, and it is it's a perfect complement, to a more traditional mechanical watch, and it's got that sort of functionality that you want. With notifications, sports, etc. And it's a natural evolution of an existing product.
Nice. So I want to switch gears a little bit, Tony. One of the walking the floor here at VivaTech, I saw many different AI things, and I use air quotes because I have opinions about what's really AI versus some of the things that people are calling AI. But regardless, AI and autonomy are really just beginning to become relevant innovations to mass consumers. From a design perspective, what do we need to do to ensure that humanity is upheld as these technologies evolve, right? Because we know and we understand that technology moves much faster than people these days, and we lose track of how we use our devices when we're around each other, and what the implications are of some of these innovations. So when thinking about AI and thinking about autonomy, what are considerations that everyone should have when they're looking at these kinds of businesses?
It's a great question. Everybody's worried about this, and I look at it in two ways. Which is, first, let's talk about AI as we knew it when Deep Blue, when Garry Kasparov got beaten in the chess game back, 20 years ago now, and everybody's like, oh my God, chess is going to die. Computers are going to take over, right? No one's going to ever play again. Well, it actually turns out more people are playing than ever. Humans are regularly beating the chess programs. They're actually using the chess programs to train themselves as well as humans, and we're co-evolving in the chess domain with the chess computers, and we're getting smarter and smarter. So you can look at AI as going, oh my God, like it was 20 years ago, we're never going to play chess again. And now what we've seen is it's actually IA, intelligent assistants, we're co-evolving with it. As it gets better, we get better. And so that's how our technology has been, the technology of agriculture. We as a society have gotten better because of the technology of agriculture, right? You could say, oh, we're going to put all these farmers out of business, right? So you have to look at these things as there's a first of fear, and then there's embracing, and then we grow and scale with it, but we have to embrace it and be a part of it and not be so scared by it, right? So I think more of it of intelligent assistance than artificial intelligence subsuming us, because we will co-evolve. Now, that said, we as designers, we as entrepreneurs, we have to make sure we're understanding that we're going to augment humans, right? We're going to make them better. We're going to have these things next to them. Don't just say this AI is going to read every single X-ray and we're going to put the doctor out. No, what you have to do is you're actually using it to find things and see if the doctor found it, and you can double check, right? Or maybe there's a lot of times when the doctor finds things that the AI didn't, or vice versa. So it's really making us better. So I see this thing as co-evolving, and it's going to be really interesting, not just in the technical fields, but also in the creative fields. If we look at design, we have AIs doing generative design for fuselages for planes or quad rotor, drones. We see it in architecture, we see it in art, we see it in music even. So we're going to have these things next to us to help us see possibilities of design that we've never seen before, because the AI will generate new things. Now, not all of them could be crap, but some might be just that little bit of spark of inspiration that you pull on, right? We travel the world now to get inspiration about all kinds of things. Now the computer could bring some stuff to us to even go further.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Innovation Award winner this morning is an AI solution. Is that right?
Correct. They're using AI and machine learning to recognize objects. So it's effectively a visual search.
And do you feel like that's the beginning of AI potential within the fashion space?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any space, there are a whole bunch of applications, and I think if you look at it, fundamentally, fashion, like music, is a culture business, right? So you have to have an understanding of what consumers want, what they're interested in. I was talking with David Kinney from IBM Watson earlier about the project that he did with Alex the Kid, the producer, where they were actually measuring sentiment and then writing songs based on the sentiment of the moment, which sounds like just kind of a nerdy idea, except that the song was a hit, right? So when you start thinking about, how can we apply that to marketing or product development, I think it's really just the beginning.
Again, as long as it's used positively, so we don't use these AI agents to make more fake news, right?
Exactly.
We're going to have some ethicists. So we're going to have to think about our own morals and ethics about how we use these things.
I mean, don't you think that's always the case at the start of a technology, though? When people talk about fake news, I always think about Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin, I don't know if you know, but he had a paper that he published in a woman's voice that was basically political satire. So definitely borderline fake news from Ben Franklin, right? And we all know that after the printing press, there was a lot of social change, a lot of social unrest, a lot of social change. Clearly, the internet is a change in human communication that's on the scale of the printing press. And there's going to be a whole bunch of things where all of us, what are we doing? We're pushing against the boundaries to see how far we can go. To come back to music, what was Napster? Napster was a company based on copyright infringement that raised $70 million in venture capital. Ultimately, as a society, we said, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. And yesterday, Netflix announced that they've surpassed cable television in the U.S., right? So the notion that anyone who makes content was going to hell in a handbasket, and now Netflix has a $5 billion content budget. Amazon has an almost $5 billion content budget. So we went from watching Lawrence Lessig debate Jack Valenti, thinking that we're all going to die, to healthy industries, and this is a change that always happens, I'd say.
Right, and we get a lightning rod. Everybody, it shocks the system, and then we all adapt and go around it. And so this is what we really want society to be. So this fake news stuff, well, the politics as well, is causing society to snap around and say, let's do the right thing now. Let's go figure out how to get this problem regulated out in a way.
Exactly. We're seeing the impact, and as a society, we're adjusting. I think that assuming it all goes downhill is sort of like assuming that on balance humans are less good than good.
And it's great to see, like in France, if you look at the number of technologists going for parliament this weekend, right? There's a lot of people who are technology savvy as compared to 5 years, 10 years ago, because we really need technology savvy, politicians. Leaders, not politicians. Yeah, you're right. Leaders in our government who can help have these discussions and help regulate as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we're seeing. I mean, thankfully, I think you're right. We are seeing it in the French government right now, and I'm seeing it, and it's what we're frankly trying to bring to LVMH is not fear of technology. It also doesn't mean being early adopters, diving in head first, but it does mean being sophisticated, right? We have to be in the know, and we have to make smart choices when it comes to technology. Being ignorant is not an option.
And not being fearful either.
Exactly.
Fearful or ignorant. Embrace it.
I feel like we could just be up here for hours.
So easy to get fired up.
Our audience,
We're never going to leave.
We're fighters.
Yeah.
Drag
Take us off.
our audience here is quite varied, but I think there are a lot of people from the startup space and many from early stage startups and many others with first-time startups. You've both been in and out of that startup world in varying capacities, and so I imagine you've noticed some consistent successes and failures, and I'm hoping that the last thing we can talk about is any hard, fast recommendations that you would give people in the startup space. What do they need to know?
Well, so depending on how you count it, I've done 7 or 8 startups, and I think what I would say is it's not for everybody. I think there's definitely something fashionable, and I feel it in Paris a little bit. Like, I got a startup. Listen, it's not for everybody. It is a hard road. It's a roller coaster. You have good days, you have bad days, and you got to smile on every one of them. I've made money, I've lost money. And having to tell your friends that you can't pay them this month really sucks.
Exactly.
I think you have to, it's definitely not for everybody. I think the thing that I would say is, as Bernard Arnault mentioned earlier, it's about execution. Ideas are cheap. Execution is really hard. So that's number one. You have to do the work. I like startups. I like running. It's like, running a race. When you show up the starting line, you either did the work or you didn't. You can't fake it. And I think that you have to really be prepared to do that work. The other thing I would mention is being early is the same as being wrong. You mentioned it earlier, but having being first, there's no prize for being first. You have to be on the right time with the right execution.
Yeah, timing is everything. Another thing is, look, I don't know how many failed startups you had, getting to some success, but lots of them. And when you see all the media going after and saying, look at this 20-something who's just very successful, the numbers show that successful entrepreneurs are usually in their mid-30s to early 40s. That's where it really is, and they've had tons of failure up until that point. And so if you think, you have your first startup and it's going to go, probably it's not. Probably 98% of the time, it's not going to go. And so you just have to know that you're going to be in it and continue to just push and push and push. And that's one thing. The other one is, if you do have a great startup, usually great startups die of indigestion, not starvation. They take on too much. They lose their focus. They have investors giving them too much money too soon. They have too many partners and too many people pulling at them in all directions going, I want a piece of this thing. You gotta stay focused. You can die of indigestion, not usually starvation if you're doing it right.
Awesome recommendations. Thank you guys. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank
Time
you.
is up.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank y'all.